Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Kevin Crosby, Business Development Principal at Amazon Alexa Startups. Kevin, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
My background has been working towards venture and startups for quite a long time. I came out of college as an economics major and almost did a PhD, but I decided quickly that I wanted to learn a little bit more around the space of business, especially around finance, and went to an industry around building products and materials. Through that experience, I was part of the innovation teams and learning around how to create new businesses within corporate ventures. And essentially what that led me to is this idea of how do you create entrepreneurship? Where do they actually get capital? What do they do to find business opportunities? And so I decided to go back to business school and major in venture capital and entrepreneurship. And through that time period during my business school, I actually worked with a series of pre-seed to seed stage companies. Some of them were actually recently went IPO'd or acquired, and then other ones did not have the same outcomes. But through that experience, it gave me a lot of opportunities to think about where I wanted to go, how I wanted to support both corporate or entrepreneurship, and think about how my role in venture could be shaped. So I took a plunge taking my internship at Amazon to understand how Amazon builds businesses, and had an internship project looking at private label opportunities. And it was a really interesting experience, showed me how fast Amazon does innovation, and excited me to come back as a full-time employee. So much so that I've been here now 7 years and have done a lot of really fun things across the journey. And so I started in retail, was part of the team building out the Canada operations team and supporting the buying opportunities. Did that for nearly 2 years. Then I was part of a team growing a new for internal chat messaging so that our teams could integrate it into the Whole Foods Prime Now in-app chat, things like that. But then through that experience, I actually stayed really close to the Seattle venture capital and startup scene and was able to engage with founders and VCs. And through that journey, actually met the hiring manager of the portfolio side of the team. And that's how I got brought into Alexa's corporate fund, because they realized through my work that I was already doing and my experience with Amazon, I'd be a good fit to join into this role of supporting our portfolio and leading our investments within the Alexa org. Fast forward, that team actually started the Alexa Fund in 2015. And at the time was Amazon's first corporate venture vehicle with the idea of growing and investing in startups with voice technology. The goal of that was really to invest in experiences that were state of the art in voice and give them resources to grow their business. Interestingly, along those lines too, we actually saw voice take a major leap forward for our customers, and we continue to look forward to invest in startups that share that enthusiasm of where the voice technology can go. And the fund also does more than just financial support. It actually supports them with tools, resources, and connections to build successful voice companies. And if you fast forward now to 2021, we've invested in over 90 companies to date, with a $200 million venture vehicle, global opportunities as well. So a lot of our portfolio companies that you'll see across the fund are not just US, but also in other locales like Europe, EMEA, and other locales as well.
Thank you, Kevin. And we will double click for sure about what you do for the startups, how you help them, how you designed it so that you actually make sure that you bring value to them. I think it's very cool that you have multiple programs, some which are about equity and some which are not, because at the end, you really want to help startups and you want them to embrace your technology. Needless to say, for the audience, if they haven't done so already, they should probably switch off their Alexa device, because we're going to say the word a lot. You mentioned you did a major in venture capital. I think you're the first one I've interviewed to have done so. So can you talk about this university and the major and what was really cool about this major itself?
Yeah, so I went to Michigan's Ross School of Business from 2012 to 2014. One of the things that I was really attracted to Michigan from other programs was the actual ability to work on venture funds. I was one of the fellows that was on the Wolverine Venture Fund, which was a program. There's actually 3 funds at the university, but this one was really focused on Series A plus venture capital, where students led deals across a myriad of technology interfaces, from sensors, semiconductors, healthcare, health devices, in consumer technology. And so I was one of the leads for health devices and actually got to lead and participate in follow-on investments for our portfolio companies. And today it's grown AUM pretty substantially. But when I was there, we had 7 million under management and it was an evergreen fund.
I'm so glad I asked because this is really way more applied learning and practice than I expected. And if I had seen this on a resume, I would have thought that's nice. But now I would actually think, wow, okay, someone was actually practice venture capital during the major. Can you share one of the best investments you made during the major and your worst and what you learned from each of them?
Yeah, the best one I would say was in a ultrasonic health device that actually did cancer detection for breast cancer. And the thing that I found really interesting about that investment was the idea that you could improve outcomes with non-invasive technology. And I think from a customer perspective, that really led, in my mind, thinking about how do you use technology for better customer experiences? What does it mean to be a part of a healthcare device technology company? And how do they think about the approval landscape and actually going to market for those devices? And so it taught me a lot around what a good company is in that space. And then also to think about what a good syndicate looks like. How do they have the right capital to be successful through that journey? And then lastly, how can investors actually support their companies through that journey? And so that was one of them. One of the other ones that I would say was maybe not so great was hard times on hard companies. If you're in a device space, like they say, hardware is hard. And so sometimes you have to raise bridge rounds or find other additional terms and agreements along that process that may make it maybe a less attractive investment, but you still believe in the outcomes. And had one on that as well. And to me, ultimately, the outcome of that was really along the lens of we believe in the vision and mission of where the founders wanted to go. And we thought at the time doing a bridge round actually made sense to get them to that next milestone so they could raise additional capital. But it was definitely a learning experience where you find yourself in a position that you may not want to be in as an investor. So,
How do you define it, or how do you make sure your processes really look at what underrepresented means? And you're a global company too.
yeah, I think along those lens, our process is to ensure we're, again, bringing in the right perspectives. Our team, specifically Alexa Startups and Alexa Fund, requires going across to Amazon, bringing in our affinity groups, our inclusion councils across teams and organization to make sure we're making the right decision. So when we, for example, launched the program last year, we did a lot of discussion and we're learning along the way of what does this mean? How do we ensure that we're communicating to the right individuals, that they're included in this process? Even just the words around that make a difference. And so to us, set up a process, what I would say, I don't call it stage gate for the sense of stage gate, but you get to a point and you're actually saying, when do we need to actually get validation from the right people that we're including in the words that we do, the sourcing of investments to BD opportunities, individuals that represent diverse groups and where they're underrepresented in capital and investment.
Can you explain maybe how you reconcile diversity, inclusion, consensus in a way you make decisions where you invest? Because even if it's not capital, but support, you still have to make choices where you help and where you don't.
Yeah, I think a big function of that for us, myself too, we have a point of view that our customers are diverse. And that in and of itself requires us to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and consensus in the view of we owe this to our customers. So the consensus is around this customer experience that we are trying to build for and make sure that it's optimal for users to actually work on Amazon.com and actually build products for them to deliver the right experience. And so you see that as the consensus model. Interestingly enough, like the journey through that has actually, I think, proven to be true, where when we find founders that may not have come through traditional locales that venture isn't invested in, we've actually shown that they're building amazing products for customers and we want to deliver that with them. And it's actually become a source of innovation for our customers as well. And I think the mental model continues to be true that more diversity and inclusion is the right consensus for customer outcomes.
Nice. I think you made it sound very easy, but how did you join the first CVC of Amazon? Did you really work hard to convince them, or did they approach you? How did the fit happen? And what was your journey into that CVC once you were already in Amazon?
Yeah, I think two things specifically stand out to me. One, I always had a vision that I wanted to work with venture and founders and startups. So I didn't lose that even while I was at Amazon. Like I always had that as a vision of how do I acquire skills and knowledges that could either help me on the investment side or help me with founders or even become a GM of a business one day. Like those are the things that I always tried to optimize for. And I think that those skills proved to be true that when the opportunity came, I had developed the right skill sets and network to be successful in a role. And when I actually came to that opportunity, it wasn't a light decision for me. Like I had actually spent a lot of time as a builder up until that point, building businesses for Amazon, building programs and technology. And what I had to step away and think about is what value do I bring in this role for founders or for this team that is unique to what my capabilities are? And how would that help me get to where I want to go? And so I actually did a lot of internal assessment in terms of what is the scope of this opportunity for me? What's the impact that I can have? And then what do I learn and accomplish over the time that I'm in a role there? And when I did that assessment, it really stood out as there's one to do a huge opportunity for impacting the category of AI and technology of where investments can be made. Two, to help build and grow new products and services that just didn't exist. And then the third thing that I really thought about was just proximity to investors and founders that I may not have had when I was not in the space, right? Like I do think like that mental model still was really important. I often get that question of how can I do it or can I take a path? And I say, you got to get started. That was actually one of the first pieces of advice that I got 10 years ago is you just got to get started. You got to seek out opportunities where you add value to founders and to investors and you're going to calibrate and learn and build that mental muscles that you need to be successful in the space.
So maybe you can tell us about why you're passionate about voice technology and why was it this topic that started the corporate VC?
So I'll start with the latter question and why corporate VC. When we started Alexa in 2015, it's an interesting journey. I'm sure many of folks have read about how that came, but like the idea was this cool computer with voice technology similar to a Star Trek computer. And in that sense, it was a really long leap to figure out how would startups and founders build with this technology and what would they need to be successful in that space. And so when we stepped back at that view, we realized there was an opportunity to invest in companies at the early seed stages to help them catalyze and build with Alexa. And I think that was one of the interesting things of like why this category versus other categories. It's an area where we could provide a very great deal of support, not just from capital, but from like hands-on support from portfolio side to build these out. And so that was the impetus behind it. The excitement to me is that when you rewind 6 years ago, it started with an assistant on a smart speaker, and that was enabling cool features like entertainment, music, communications, things like that, that customers really fell in love with.
So clearly your passion for the category is obvious, but can you also talk about what was difficult about this change and what got you excited to make that change?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The difficult factor that I had to think about is stepping away from the venture fund itself and what that would mean for me as like a growth of, as an individual, what I would be doing from skill sets and how that would manifest and the outcomes that I would achieve through it. When I step back and reflect on why and how I made that decision, I think the one thing that really stands out was impact on founders and being able to work with more founders that may not have had support and access. So I was part of the team that really helped shape the initial idea of Alexa startups. And at the time, we were only able to support greater than a handful, meaningful amount of portfolio companies, but there were many more startups that either didn't need or didn't want capital at the time, but were unable to work with Alexa in the right capacity that I think we could offer from a BD perspective. And so stepping back, I thought this is an opportunity to help impact customers in a positive way, continue to grow innovation and offer new customer facing features and capabilities. And so that was the catalyst. The growth on it was actually me being able to help shape where do we think that the biggest opportunity for our support can go. So finding device classes and the new devices that can interact with Alexa was one of the areas that I thought was interesting. Working with the next generation of smart home companies, working with the next generation of smart properties companies and things like that, where I can say, that there's a meaningful opportunity where if we put people with founders, we can deliver really cool product and innovation. And that's continued to be true. Like I think today we're still as excited as we were when we started the team, and we see a big opportunity to keep growing with our founders that we work with.
Very nice. And maybe you could describe the difference beyond the equity part between Alexa Fund and Alexa Startups. And for the entrepreneurs listening in, I'm sure they can address both and it could be reinforcing each other. And I'm guessing the fact that so well both teams could also be one of these nice glue between the teams. So can you tell about how this actually compound?
Yeah. So think about the separate ways that we work together. Alexa Startups is really an expert, I would say, across engaging startups and VCs across the venture lifecycle from pre-seed to late stage growth equity. And a big function of what we're doing is looking at where first in kind use cases are and how do we integrate with Alexa, and often looking at what are the hard to integrate opportunities, because while there's hardened technologies for smart home and thermostats and light bulbs, often working with startups is really defining where that future can go. And so our team is really positioned for a lot of those deep relationships with startups and VCs, pan Amazon, and helping bring access of our support models across teams, whether they're trying to go to market on Amazon.com or if they're trying to get support on AWS. We're actually a really strong conduit in addition to the technical support and resources that we have. Importantly, to your point, though, we have really good calibration of like where the fund might want to be investing in based off of their previous track record and kind of categories that they're interested in. And so when and if the time makes sense, like we do offer opportunities for potential investment and introductions to the fund, and then the fund will take their own processes parallel. They're not required like to do one or the other. And that's the way to separate is if and when the founders are ready and the investment fund is interested and wants to pursue it, that makes sense. But otherwise, we continue working with the founders. On the fund side, it's a little bit different in the sense that the goal is really state of the art voice technology, like a little bit probably further beyond where sometimes startups can actually work with our BD team. And that may manifest itself in a variety of ways. But the key difference and distinction is the fund does provide equity investment, financial investment in the companies that they work with. The output of that is pretty hands on portfolio support. And so while BD can scale and support a lot of companies, the founders that are through the fund get a handful of managed portfolio managers to work with them and bridge the gap and bring them support that may not be as scalable through just Alexa and Pan Amazon, but they look really deep into opportunities that are bespoke even deeper to the companies. Those are the two distinctions. I will say the majority of companies that I work with, at times they may be interested in capital, but they don't really need to seek it out. And so I can also bridge the gap there with other investor opportunities and as well that might make a good fit.
Very nice. I want to spend the last minutes on two topics. One is the decision making and how it's different between Alexa Fund and Alexa Startups and maybe what's similar. And then one of your last principle, which is about delivering results, which is always very hard to tell when it's about corporate VC, strategic,
Sure.
and so on. So let's start with decision making. Can you describe the decision making at Alexa Fund, Alexa Startups, and what was different and for good reasons, and what was the same for good reasons?
Sure. So decision making on Alexa startups, we really frame it around first in kind use cases and three outcomes that we try to optimize for. Outcomes there around what are the new and novel integrations that we can work with. And then two, how do we accelerate new opportunities and new categories that might be interesting for startups? And the last one is building founder trust. And I think those areas are allowing us to frame when and how we work with founders. And a big part of that, again, going back to one of our earlier conversations, is how do we bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into our portfolio of companies that we work with and support to create these new use cases? And so across that's our core decision making framework of how we select and work with founders, and we run that through a process of how accessible is the technology today, where might we want to go, and how do we help influence the future categories. On the investment side, it's slightly different because they are putting capital to work, right? So they have to do their traditional, what I would consider investment processes of due diligence around financials and legal and all of those things that are required for investments. And so they're just distinctly different in those regards. But I think ultimately the outcomes, to your point, reflect the goals and objectives that we're trying to achieve. And so we measure them slightly different. When we look at outcomes for us, things that we look at are new integrations with the companies and delivering results to our customers around Alexa. Whereas for the fund, you'd shape it around like investment outcomes potentially as well.
So if you were to define or to explain the true north KPI, you probably have many KPIs, but you have always one that's more important. That's the one we call true north. What would be the true north KPI for Alexa Fund and for Alexa Startups?
So for the startups team, definitely looking at new interesting use cases that we launch. I think that when I look at that, we're always trying to push on really cool, compelling outcomes that are visible to customers. If a customer can't touch and feel it, we probably didn't do enough of our work. Like that's my mental model. On the fund, I would say it's probably a little bit more visionary of like where they can go. If you look at the track record of the investments, they're broad and very big impact. And the cool part about that is like it helps shape visions and categories with the founder. So like we actually take fewer select use cases and go really deep on where they might go. And they open up even bigger categories potentially and things like that. And so it's a little bit less of the direct integration, but more shaping like where things are interesting for our partners.
It's very interesting. I'm starting to have this visual model where Alexa Fund is about going deep and Alexa Startups is about going wide. Very nice. And the last one I really want to deep dive, not just trying to play with words, but is delivering results. How do you really measure delivering results? And how do you compare what you had expected to deliver versus tracking it that you did deliver on expectation or differently?
I think that's a really good question. It's aptly timed in terms of like how we do our planning processes and things like that. But a big part of that is setting the right goals. I'm a big believer in smart goals that are measurable, attainable, but also setting really strong reach opportunities and then tracking against it. We definitely use mechanisms, talked about this earlier, but you need those mechanisms to drive accountability and making sure that people will actually deliver results. Now, the harder thing, I think what you're pointing to is how do you know which is the right goal? So, like a big function of that to me is starting with that North Star vision of where you want to go. And sometimes that one's not as tangible in some regards. So, you actually have to make sure that's really crisp and clear so that you can put goals around it. And then you layer on your 3 to 5 year plans and your annual plans, and you're building goals and strategies against those plans so that you execute against it. And sometimes in my mind, I'd rather slightly miss a goal that's right than make a goal that's wrong. And so you have to constantly calibrate like, is this the right goal?
It's very nice. I think you made reference to the SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. I actually don't like the A for attainable. I like the A for ambitious. And I think R should be relevant, which I think is exactly what you're describing. If the direction is right, even if you don't achieve everything, that's already better than going into the completely wrong direction. So I want to take maybe the last 3, 4 minutes just to talk about what's next for voice technology and where would you like to see entrepreneurs, startups, and also partners, so VCs and CVCs, to come to you, and what for?
That's one of my favorite questions around what's next. I think for where we're going, we're always looking for the next generation devices that are applicable with voice technology and seeing how this ambient compute later makes it easier and better and different for customers, reducing friction and making it more engaging. And then for investors, takes the lens of working around educating how we work with investors, what we can do with Alexa today, where we could go, where they should be thinking about investment opportunities. And then ultimately, if they are looking for founders that are building cool things with voice, we're always happy to make introductions and support those types of engagements as well. And so we regularly convene investors and founders together to have talks around where this category is going.
That's very nice. And that's also about adding value to all your partners and people you invest in. So it's really good. Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. This was a great hour with you. And I think we learned a lot about what you're doing, why you're excited about voice technology, but also how to engage with you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure meeting all of you as well. Thank you.